Hey everybody, it's Brett and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Stack, where today I am sitting down with author Sarah Damoff for her debut novel, The Bright Years. A little bit about Sarah. Her writing has appeared in Porterhouse Review, Ruminate Magazine, and Open Global Rights, among other publications. She holds a degree in family studies and a child protection certification from Harvard University. Sarah lives in Dallas with her husband and children. So now enjoy this episode of Behind the Stack. I am so happy to be sitting down with debut author Sarah Damoff for her book, The Bright Years, which is so fantastic. I have to tell you, I read this last week and it was almost a one-sit read for me. I just flew through it, but I finished the book and I, not gonna lie, had shed a few tears. And as I was wiping my face, I was like, oh my God, people are going to love this thing. And honestly, I've already gone through so many of the Goodreads reviews and so many people are loving it. So congratulations. It's really great.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me here today. I'm excited to talk about the book and thank you for reading it and all of your encouraging words.
Before we launch into the book, I did want to talk a little bit about you and how you got to this point. Where did you end up going to college?
I went to the University of North Texas.
But you weren't always a Texas person, right?
I was born in Dallas.
Oh, you were?
And yes. And so I've lived, I moved around a lot due to just family circumstances, but it was always kind of within the DFW Metroplex, except for during college, I spent 6 months in India. That's my time outside of Texas. So
was that like study abroad?
It ended up, so I went on a short trip and I loved it and I wanted to go back and I was teaching and working with children over there. And I was just going to take time off school because I wanted to go so badly and I got the opportunity. And then I ended up thinking, well, I'm working with kids. Could I use this as my practicum? Because I was studying child development. So I was able to use it. And I mean, the school was like, this is one of the coolest, practicums we've ever had a student do. So
was that an incredible experience?
It was so incredible. I've been back multiple times, but not with my children. So now I would really love to take my children. Yeah, it was amazing.
Wow.
But other than that, I'm a Texas girl.
Texas through and through.
Yes.
Okay, and so then you moved into social work, correct?
Yes.
Let me see if I got this correct. It was child protection, child rights in theory and practice. You got your degree from Harvard, yes?
That's a certificate, yes. Yeah.
Okay, so explain to me then, because I have a dear friend of mine who's a social worker in New Orleans, and her specialization is infant adoption. Mm-hmm. But so what is your specialization?
Foster care.
Okay.
Yes.
And you've been doing that for 19 years?
It's long. I mean, I started volunteering at a children's advocacy center with foster children and got very involved when I was still late in high school. And I started college studying elementary education and then was just I'm so happy for the people who can do this and teach, but I specifically just want to be working in nonprofit and with foster children and in social work. And so I pivoted to focus on that.
And is some of that about placement? Is that what you do for foster children?
That's a great question. I've done many things in that field. So one of the first things I did was residential treatment, which is where they're all living in one center, getting care at that center. And I worked there as an educational counselor. And I transitioned. I did some curriculum, some family training. Most recently, for about 7 years, I was on the court side of things. Okay. So a guardian ad litem. So we are assigned to the case of the foster child as soon as they enter state custody, when they're removed from their family, and we just get completely involved in the case so that we can make a recommendation to the judge in terms of permanent placement.
Okay. This is and I always ask this because I talk to my friend a lot about this. It's got to be tough. And how do you not get pulled down by it? How do you stay kind of above the fray to a degree and keep not your wits, but I just think it has to be so emotionally tough.
I don't always. Starting out, particularly back a long time ago now, when I was working in residential treatment, it was an extremely intense and a very high turnover rate. Social work in general is a very high turnover rate because of a lot of issues and a lot of things, but not least of all how difficult it is emotionally. So it's there was a learning curve and it was a process. And I didn't mention this, but my husband and I also fostered a baby for a while, and that's
Oh,
all we
wow.
were doing. I was home with our biological kids and the foster baby. And there are a lot of things in social work you can't do when you're actively a foster parent at the same time. So that's what we did for a little while. After that, I kind of had this like reckoning of, you know, I also have to take care of my own heart and mind.
Mm,
And that's when I started what I was most recently doing, which is on the court side of things. And it's a little bit less of the intensity was certainly less than being a foster parent and being in residential treatment. And for the season of life that I'm in, it felt like this is a perfect fit because I feel like I'm able to make a difference. I'm able to keep some work-life balance. I have three children, biological children of my own, and so able to finally reach a little bit of balance with that. But, you know, I also reached a point where I just thought, you get a new case of a new child and you just cry over it. And I just thought, but I wouldn't want it any differently. I wouldn't want to get to the point where I feel numb about this. And that's also a danger in the job, you
sure.
know? And so I don't want that. I'd rather it hurt.
Wow. First of all, any job that deals with young children and their vulnerabilities and all of that, I, I think it's amazing what you do, and I think it's one of those jobs, kind of like teachers, that are not immediately understood, and also not appreciated to the level they need to be because of what you're actually doing. Um, so I'm so curious then how the transition or the inspiration for the writing began, and did some of that come out of these experiences that you were going through? And tell me about the writing and how that started. And there's a part of you that in the back of your mind that you were like, I also want to write and do this, or had you always done that?
That's a great question, and I love that we're transitioning from having been talking about foster care and social work because it definitely was connected for me. I have always enjoyed writing, but I never considered doing anything, just it was just for myself. It was just a way to process things my whole life. But yes, I didn't have any particular training or certainly never thought about writing a novel. After I started working with foster children, I would just in private journals, write
Mm,
about each child and some of those experiences. And I got to the point where I found myself, wanting to share some of that, but you can't because it's confidential. That's another thing
right.
that makes it hard because you feel like you kind of have to hold it all in yourself. And I read a book in 2020. You may be familiar with the Lost Children Archive.
No, I don't
Um,
know.
it's about child migrants specifically. It's a very well done novel. It was really timely. And for whatever reason, this sounds very obvious to say now, but that was the novel that first kind of inspired me to think I can fictionalize what I've experienced and what I've witnessed
Mm,
and have characters that are new, but it's based on what I know to be true about this general field or this general demographic. And I could write something fiction. And it just was this
mm.
kind of light bulb epiphany that again sounds obvious, but I think like the day I finished Lost Children Archive, I was like, I'm going to try to fictionalize some of what I've experienced. And that was my first inspiration and attempt. And I actually wrote a manuscript that I didn't end up doing anything with. That was in 2020. And then 2021 was when I wrote The Bright Years.
Wow. And when you started the Bright Years, then, and in a second, I want you to, well, maybe I should do this first since we're getting into it. For our listeners or our viewers, do you have an elevator pitch or a log line for the book?
Oh, great. Sure. Yes. It's a little longer than a log line with this
That's
story,
okay.
but
It can be a big elevator.
okay, great. We're going to go a few floors
Yes.
up.
We can go up stories. Yes. We can like Empire State Building.
I love it. Oh my goodness. Okay. So The Bright Years follows a family through several decades. We start with Ryan and Lillian Bright's love story. We see them fall in love and get married and then have a daughter, and some things start to come out from their past that they've kind of been keeping, and they haven't been forthright with each other or really with themselves about some secrets and some wounds that they have in their past. And as those do, they begin to come up for them. Their daughter comes of age, watching their marriage struggle and having to learn for herself, who are my parents? What decisions did they make even before I was born that might impact my life and how I live my life? And so it really just explores the themes of just generational impact as we follow this family very intimately through a few decades.
That was excellent. And by the way, your building wasn't even that tall, so that was very concise.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's getting, people it's been saying that for fans of Mary Beth Keane and Claire Lombardo, and that's kind of right on. And I love both those authors. And for people who love those authors, I think this is going to be like, kind of the Cinderella perfect fit for those readers. It's just great. But now where my question started for you, based on what you were saying, is who was your centerpiece at first for this? Like, what was your inspiration? Where did you kind of the access point for the story to launch off?
Great question. Surprisingly, I feel that it surprises many people, but it began as mother and daughter. So Lillian and Georgette. And originally I wrote this was an entire novel in letters. My initial title was called The Bright Letters. And when I rewrote it to not be epistolary, it became The Bright Years. But it was originally, the conceit was when a mother or any parent, but in this case it was a mother, has these things in her past, and then she has a child, and you're looking at this child and you're like, at some point I'm gonna want to tell you who I am, and these things that maybe are heavier. And there's no magic line as a parent where all of a sudden you're like, okay, my child's now old enough, she's ready to hear these things about, who I was before she was born. And so that was the conceit, was this mother not really knowing how to do it. And even as her daughter was a baby, beginning to just write letters to think, I want to tell her about this, but maybe it's things she hasn't even told other people. And so that was the original conceit. And Ryan, who is now a very central character, the book sort of starts and ends with him. At first, he was kind of he was Georgette's father, but then he was kind of just a part of Lillian's past that she was going to be telling Georgette about. And as she started telling her daughter about her father, and I started giving Ryan a voice, he became much more central. He just refused to be a stereotype, and he needed just a lot more complexity and humanity than he would have had if she were to just tell her daughter, this is who your dad was, but he's gone now. He couldn't stay that way. That was my original plan, but it's not what happened. So, and
did a lot of that come once you started working with an editor in terms of the revision process, or was that something that you just started to figure out yourself?
It was way before I worked with an editor. It was within the first draft. I realized he was going to be a bigger character. And then with each revision, he started taking a little bit more space on the page and in the story. So it was pretty, honestly, once I sold the book and worked with an editor, of course we did do edits, but I think she would have said it was a pretty light edit. I had worked on the book for almost 2 years at that point. So,
and had you, I'm so curious, especially for people who are writing themselves, did you have an agent at that point already, or had you just blindly started to send the manuscript out?
Brett, I had nothing. I didn't know what a query letter was, which is, what you pitch an agent with.
Yeah.
I had no idea, like, anything about publishing, how the industry works, how you get a novel published, the different options for publishing. You've got traditional or self-publishing. I didn't know any of that. I always have been a big reader, but like many readers, I didn't pay attention to which publishing houses were on the spine of the book or any of the, I usually didn't read the acknowledgments. I just was reading. And so that was all a very new, big process and learning curve for me. So I had the book, I drafted it in about 2 months. It was very fast. Wow. I don't outline, so I'm kind of a discovery writer. So I kind of describe it as like, it's like an amplified reading experience where you're just like, the story just kind of comes out and I I'd get so excited. I'm like, what's going to happen next? And I really couldn't figure it out until I just started typing it. So it's almost addictive to just keep going, because you're like, just in the same way you want to turn the pages when you're reading. It was like, I just need to see what story's going to come out here. So it was, I have to do a lot of work and revisions because of that, because I draft very fast to kind of learn the story. It's almost like it almost is a glorified outline, but it's written in prose, because that's just how I am able to discover the story. So the first draft, that was 2 months. It was very fast. I showed it to a few people, friends and family, and I kind of set it aside, forgot about it, didn't touch it for, at least like 6 months. And the following summer, I was starting to listen to podcasts about publishing and start to think about that, and I just felt compelled to open it back up and really dig into research. How do I do this if I want to get this published? And just as I learned more, I was revising the manuscript, revising my pitch. And it was about a year later, so it was August or September of 2023, that I signed with my agent. And then a few weeks later, we sold it. I was speaking with editors at several of the major houses, and then we sold it in a preempt to Simon & Schuster. So that part was definitely a whirlwind.
Wow. You are literally like Lana Turner at the counter at the soda shop with the person who sits next to them and says, I'm going to make you a movie star, because that's incredible. And like, what an inspiration. That's amazing. That's really, really amazing. Congratulations. Because you don't always hear about it that way. It's, you know what I mean? And just your timeline, that's incredible. Really, that's great.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I will say I worked very hard, but I know that there are people that spend a lot longer, and I feel so grateful for the agent and editor I was able to connect with, because they have just been perfect. And like I said, I was so green. I didn't know anything. I know the first few emails I sent to agents were totally quote unquote wrong. They were not, there was just me talking. I didn't know there was a particular format that was expected or any of that. So I learned that slowly over time.
And in a way, though, I wonder if that kind of, for lack of a better word, naivete worked to your benefit, because there was not an extra kind of, if you did put that burden on yourself or that expectation, that could have impeded something. Do you know what I mean? So for this, you could just kind of be like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing, but here it is. And you let the work speak for itself. So it's so awesome.
Right. By the time I got my agent, I did have a good, more appropriate professional pitch, I think. But I think you're right. And that's something that in the end, I was able to feel that much more confident in the work, because I was like, I had no connections in the industry. I have no platform. I cold pitched people and I sold the book. So there must be something good in it. That's all I could tell myself, was just like, there's no other reason I would get a book deal other than the book being worthwhile.
No, because there's too much. Right. There's too much stuff they're going through, and there's too many options. So no, 100%. All right. So talking about these characters, they're all so great. Lillian, just to start with, because she kind of is the launch off point of these people to me. She's really interesting. And I want to go back to something you said earlier when you're talking about children, and at what point it's appropriate to kind of let your child in on your own history and your own life. Because I feel like, when we're all kids, you look at your parents as the people that, feed you, they love you, they do all the things they're supposed to do. You don't look at them as separate individuals who have a life, who had a life previous. I once had an English teacher who said, a child's biggest disappointment is when they realize their father is infallible and just human. And their second is when they realize their mother is the same way as well. Yes. And I've always thought about that. And even in parenting, do you find that as a parent? And at what point are things appropriate to talk about? Because also, I think parenting has changed so radically from when I was raised and how I was raised and what we talk about. And I think part of that is due in part to the fact that most kids have access to like a computer in their pocket 24 hours a day. And there's such a dissemination of information that's happening that we were never privy to, right?
Right.
So do you find that? What do you hold back and what do you actually share, I guess?
That's a great question. Yes, I think it's interesting because, not all of us have children, but all of us have parents.
Yeah.
Everyone has parents, and so my first experience with this kind of theme of when does a parent disclose to their child more about life and their life in particular, my first experience with that was as a daughter. So as a daughter, learning who are my parents, and what things did they choose to tell me? What things did I have to figure out for myself? And questions that you have for your parents. And that, I had my first child in my early 20s. So maybe it's because I had children young that still felt kind of fresh to me. My own
Yeah.
journey with, now I'm an adult figuring out who my parents were. And just as we age, even if your parents are very open with you, you still think about things differently. Questions you didn't know to have when you were 15 years old, all of a sudden when you're 22, you're like, wait, how did this happen to my parents? How did they do
Yeah.
this? Because so it's just something that on the child side everybody experiences. And so that was very much in my mind, becoming a parent and now having 3 kids who are hitting teenage years. I'm definitely I'm very open with them. It's interesting with, my working in social work and working with children for so many years. I'm very aware of what's developmentally appropriate and just kind of using my general. My children are very sharp, and I think all children are. I think a lot of times we underestimate. And I know I have memories of
100%.
this as a child. I remember my parents think I don't understand something, but I do. They think I didn't see something, but I did. And I think most people have at least a memory or two like that from being a child, and we really underestimate. And so my general rule is to share with them in response. So I might not initiate unless it's something that is just super important that I talk to them about. I'm not going to initiate, let me tell you this thing about how
That's
heavy
right.
the world is, but rather
Right.
when they come to me with a question or they bring something up or they tell a story about something they saw or they heard, then I'll meet them there and I'll meet them and I think they know, they do, because we have very open and they'll come to me first with their questions. I think they know that I will be honest with them. I'm going to meet them at the level of their question and I'll be honest with them, whether it's a question about me personally or just the world in general. So I don't know if that answers your question
No,
a
no,
little
it doesn't.
bit.
No, it doesn't. It's 100%. I was like, new parents, take note. This is a great advice. And we did the same thing, which is basically if a question was asked, we would only give as much as was asked of us. So
Right.
if there's something asked, we would answer that part of the question. If it invoked another question, we would continue. But it didn't necessarily mean let's sit down and have this whole conversation about, global warming or
Right.
whatever. Well, I'll answer as succinctly and as appropriately as I can this question that's being asked.
Exactly. Yes.
Because I do agree with you, and I think it speaks to Georgette, the daughter, as well.
Mm-hmm.
Kids do understand so much more than we do give them credit for. And there is, I think, a built-in, I want to say empathy that
Mm-hmm.
exists within all children that for whatever reason gets beat out, and I don't mean physically, but I just mean beat out by life. And I think that Ryan is a prime example of that, the father in this, of someone who had a really horrible childhood and kind of the generational effect of what this is.
Absolutely.
I'm not going to give any spoilers away at all, but there is an incident that happens in Lillian's past that is integral to her when they're talking about secrets, and secrets exist in this book in a lot of contexts. But I had to read this passage that I thought it was, look, I'll never completely understand this feeling or even having the opportunity to carry a child, right? And the responsibility that comes with that. But I loved this moment because I think this speaks to so many women that Lillian gets pregnant. And this is an early on before this is an early part of her life.
Right.
And it says, what kind of woman gives away a child? I could have kept him or had an abortion legalized a few months ago, except I couldn't do that when it came down to it. Sometimes a woman's choice is between impossible and impossible and impossible. And she just has to make it. Survival calculations become more urgent than rightness. I just thought that was such an amazing passage. And I think it would speak to so many women because there are these impossible choices that you have to live with, and that Lillian ends up bearing up and doing what she feels is right and having no idea about what those ramifications or how it's going to play out later in so many ways, both emotionally and beyond. So I don't know. I just thought that was great. Georgette, she is so amazing. She speaks so much to me about the resilience of the human spirit and the way that we as humans, as individuals, and especially children, survive in the face of huge obstacles. Can you talk a little bit about her?
Yes.
It's hard, and it's hard because I don't want to give any spoilers away about anything.
I won't spoil anything. Yes, I think you're right, and I love that you said that. I haven't thought of it in those exact terms, that, just seeing resilience through her. I think that we see her in this book. One thing I wanted to do with this book was a long arc of what it's like to live. I mean, it's no spoiler or secret that Ryan struggles with addiction. He has alcoholism, and it is not something where he just, within a few years, he's sober. It's many decades of a struggle. And so it's really all of Georgette's life. And I think something that in varying degrees is true for many parents is we experience or glimpse a particular kind of grace from our children. And, whether it's something huge like what Ryan and Georgette experienced, or whether it's something smaller, I know I've had moments where it's like my children see me with such generous eyes. They, when I've made mistakes, or I've made a mistake that hurts them or hurts their feelings, and they're so gracious and forgiving. And like you talked earlier about just this kind of natural empathy that's there, in particular with parents. Children can be very, almost to a fault, protective of their parents. And it's something that Georgette has to learn as she goes through adolescence and into adulthood. She has to grapple with, she's not perfect at all either. And so she has to grapple with, a child will always want to have a good relationship with their parent. So she has that, but they also have periods of estrangement and times where he really hurts her. And, the kind of generosity of childhood, naturally, and probably it's healthy, she then has to learn what to do with that pain and with that anger toward him. And she does that, and that's a big wrestle in her own life. And then that, maybe she can't even articulate as she's younger, but when she gets older, just having to try to make sense of herself and the ways that she might even see her dad in her, and where she's going to land in terms of, now, how do I see him? How do I relate to him now that I'm an adult? And how am I like him? And what do I do with that? So I think those are some of her big questions that her character is asking in this story.
Well, and it's really beautiful how you've carried, because Ryan's an artist and he has a gallery, and the way that translates to her as well, becoming a photographer. Again, not spoiling anything, but I just love to watch kind of the gifts that come out of this generational thing.
Yes.
I really thought that was so beautiful. There can be some kind of flower in the dirt, for lack of a better way of saying it. It really was. I thought, oh my God, this is so beautiful. It's a fun part about being a parent, is watching in your children what things are similar and what come out, and what things are developing.
Absolutely. And if I can just say too, because just with what you're saying, I think it's so important. And this was something, I think this is probably something that's really resonating from the people I've heard from who have lived with and loved someone who has an addiction. What was important to me throughout the book was showing these moments of closeness and affection. And because otherwise you're like, why do they care about each other so much? But the reality is, when you love someone with an addiction, usually you're still, in this case, for sure, you're still having fun together, you're laughing together. I mean, the reason it hurts so much is because you love them so much. That otherwise the pain wouldn't be as heightened as it is. But and because there's so much back and forth, because when they're doing well or when you think they're doing well, you're having this great time together and you're feeling that closeness of parent and child in Ryan and Georgette's case. And then you're like, what did you do? Now that's why it hurts so much every time he goes back to the bottle and hurts her, doesn't show up, because there are still times where he is showing up and it's just a very human, real, I think it does happen, but it's a rare case where it's just so extreme where it's just an awful relationship. I interviewed people and everyone I spoke with, it's a very back and forth. It's, otherwise you would just cut them out of your lives, but it's like, you just can't do that because you care about them and maybe you see that they're really trying.
Yep. And they had a good history. It's
Yes.
not like it started immediately and it was toxic and he was abusive. It
Right.
wasn't that. So
Right.
it's something that developed, which is also very real. I mean, certainly, I think everybody knows about people in relationships that, look, no one goes into a relationship thinking, I really want this to suck. You're with that person for a reason, and hopefully you're finding the support and the love and all of the things that constitute a healthy and lasting relationship. But they did have that. So it's just something that it makes sense to me why Lillian wants so badly to believe, like you said, he's trying. It's not just, it's just the cycle and
Right.
it's rough.
And I think he's made a lot of progress even generationally, because what we know of his dad, which is of course much less, that was a more difficult relationship.
Sure. Yeah.
He still comes into the addiction and struggles with the addiction, but he does so much better than his own father did. And so even though there's this kind of generational pain and trauma, you still see some progress and there's reason for hope in that. And of course, that makes the whole back and forth that much more confusing when their characters are living through it. But you're right. He's trying the whole time and he's aware when he fails and he's trying to protect them from his failures.
There's a theme in this that I love so much. And I talk about this on this podcast with other authors a lot, of the idea of found family versus your given family.
Yes.
And she has these great friend, Shauna, who lives next door, who has a son. And they're just such great characters in it. And I loved this idea of these two moms coming together with their children, and then the longevity of that too. It's really beautiful to see. I just thought that it was a great addition to kind of the fabric of the book.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I think found family is so important, and friendships and female friendships in particular. And as adults, those even when you might have a healthy marriage, there are certain things that you have to have more than just your spouse. Those friendships are so important, and especially when your kids can have another adult to look up to and things like that. So thank you for saying that. Yeah.
No, sure. One thing I wanted to ask you really quick was, your cover is so beautiful, and there's a picture on your Instagram with the original art. Now, is that your painting?
Oh, no. Well, now it is because I purchased it. So the story with the cover is that I had, told the team at Simon & Schuster when we were talking about cover, I told them I think it would be cool if it could be painted. And of course, even the font is painted on this cover because Ryan is a painter. And so what they came back to me with is they found this artist who's a painter in South Korea. Her name is Young Park, and she had this painting, which is now the book cover. And that's the only one we ever looked at because it just was immediately the perfect cover for this story. Just kind of the picture of need and humanity and hope at the same time, all represented by her painting. And so because they did this in this way, they just found an artist with her painting. I was able to purchase the original painting from her. So that all came from, Simon & Schuster finding the cover, and then I was able to purchase it, and it now hangs at my house. So
oh my gosh, that's amazing.
It's so special.
And I will, when these episodes go up, I'm going to link her Instagram page as well, because I went and looked at all of her stuff. And
Yes.
she's a beautiful artist, but
beautiful.
it's so vibrant. Like the picture on your wall. I mean, the cover is so gorgeous, but to see the colors kind of explode, it's really stunning. In closing, I have to say, not every book sticks the landing. This absolutely sticks the landing, and it's finished so movingly and beautifully that kudos to you. I thought it was great.
Thank you so
So,
much.
so everyone get The Bright Years. It's simply fantastic. I cannot believe this is a debut. It's so self-assured and really, really stunning. Buy independent if you're able to buy independent. And of course, you can always go to my bookshop.org page and it will be there as well. Sarah, this was so delightful. You're just lovely. Congratulations on all of it. It's really, really, really exciting.
Thank you for everything. Thank you for having me today, Brett.